You know that feeling when you are sitting across a table from someone, maybe it's, I don't know, a first date or a really high-stakes job interview or even just one of those awkward casual networking
But yeah, the
events?
ones where you're just holding a tiny plastic cup of lukewarm wine.
Yes, exactly. You're holding that terrible wine, and the other person smiles, leans in, and just drops the ultimate conversational bomb on you.
Right, the classic, so tell me about yourself.
It's terrifying. Suddenly, your brain just flatlines.
Yeah.
It is literally like you are a deer caught in the headlights, and you have completely forgotten every basic fact about your own existence.
You forget your own name
And
sometimes.
literally, you're sitting there like, have I ever lived on Earth? Do I have hobbies? You have absolutely no idea. It feels like an unannounced pop quiz on your own soul.
Well, we all experience that physiological spike in heart rate. The panic sets in because that prompt, I mean, it feels incredibly vast and entirely open-ended.
It really does.
It masquerades as this simple icebreaker, you know? But to our brains, it feels like a high-wire test of our entire identity. Most of us default to either freezing up completely or nervously rambling through our resumes.
Right, just desperately hoping we hit upon a detail the other person actually cares about.
Exactly. And adults complicate this moment tremendously. We layer on so much social posturing, worrying about sounding impressive or witty or, perfectly polished.
Which is why the video we are digging into for today's deep dive is so refreshing and honestly, a bit of a revelation.
It really is.
We are looking at a YouTube video from a creator called the Mr. English channel, specifically a lesson titled, Learn How to Talk About Yourself in English.
Yeah, and on the surface, you might just scroll right past it.
Totally, because it is explicitly designed as a straightforward beginner's guide for English language learners. It just features a very basic scripted conversation between two characters named Emily and Paul.
But that beginner-level simplicity is precisely what makes it such a powerful psychological tool. Well, because the video is built for language learners who might only have a vocabulary of like a few hundred words, it completely strips away all that neurotic social posturing we just talked about.
Oh, that makes sense. Because you literally don't have the words to be pretentious.
Exactly. There's no room for industry jargon, no space for humble bragging, and no complex sentence structures to hide behind. It forces the speakers down to the raw, essential building blocks of human connection.
So by analyzing how Paul and Emily construct their introductions from scratch, we can extract a universal blueprint for how to handle this interaction.
Right, we can decode how anyone can master that universally dreaded command.
And watching Paul and Emily navigate this, you realize they don't jump straight into their deepest passions or, their life philosophies.
No, they start by building a very sturdy foundation.
Right. Before you can get to the colorful, nuanced parts of who you are, you really have to establish the basic reality of your existence in time and space.
Because our brains need context. When you meet someone for the first time, your mind is furiously trying to categorize them, searching for a framework to understand how to interact.
So if someone starts an introduction by jumping straight into like an abstract thought or a random hobby without grounding you first.
It creates cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
You feel untethered because you don't even know the basics of who is speaking to you.
Which is why Paul and Emily anchor their conversation beautifully by establishing immediate stark contrasts.
Right. The details are very deliberate.
Paul introduces himself as 28, from Canada. He specifically mentions living in a small town, in a house with a garden, and working as an English teacher.
And then Emily counters that.
Yeah, she shares that she is 25, from the United States, but she lives in a busy, noisy, big city, in a small apartment, and studies art.
They're painting these very clear opposing pictures.
Small, quiet town with a garden versus a noisy city apartment. The teacher versus the student.
And notice how those contrasts work on your brain. They aren't just reciting demographic data, they're actually building a mental stage.
A mental stage, I like that.
Yeah. By providing clear, contrasting, and simple facts, they are actively lowering the cognitive load for the listener.
So the listener doesn't have to work hard to picture Paul or Emily.
Exactly. The brain immediately pulls up the archetype of a quiet Canadian town and pairs it with the bustle of an American city apartment. You give the other person a safe, sturdy, conceptual stage to stand on.
And once they feel oriented, their brain relaxes.
Right. They are primed for the actual connection to happen.
But hold on, I have to push back a little here. If I sit down across from someone and just rattle off my age, my zip code, and my job title, I sound like a robot reading a census form.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels incredibly dry. Like, how is reciting geographical and professional data actually building a human connection rather than just dumping a verbal resume on the table?
Well, it absolutely becomes a dry census form if you stop there. The mistake most people make is believing the foundational facts are the entire introduction.
Oh, so they just stop after the facts.
Right. The psychological scaffolding is necessary, but it is just the first step. You provide the basics to satisfy the other person's brain, essentially saying, here's the file folder you can put me in.
But once the folder is open, you have to actually put something meaningful inside it.
Exactly. That is where you pivot from establishing reality to establishing relatability.
Building the stage before putting on the play.
Hmm.
So once Paul and Emily have that stage built, they move out of the resume phase and into what I like to think of as the relatability layers.
Oh, I love that phrase, relatability layers.
Yeah, they start adding these highly specific details that transition them from, two-dimensional data points into real flesh and blood human beings.
And the video doesn't just have them pull random topics out of a hat either.
No, they focus on three very specific areas: family, pets, and passions.
And these categories are chosen with incredible precision. They represent universally understood experiences that carry, low emotional risk, but offer incredibly high emotional resonance.
Right, because almost everyone understands the concept of family dynamics, or the appeal of a pet, or just the joy of a favorite meal.
It allows you to signal your internal emotional landscape without having to explain it defensively or worry about crossing some kind of boundary.
And the way they share these details is what really caught my attention. They don't just say, oh, I have a family and I like food.
Right, that would be too vague.
Yeah. Paul tells Emily that his mom is a writer, his dad is a doctor, and his younger sister Sarah plays the piano.
And Emily does the same thing.
She shares that her mom is a teacher, her older brother Tom is 29, and her dad is a chef who cooks delicious meals at home.
The pets too, right.
Exactly, they do the same thing with pets. Paul doesn't just say he likes animals. He says he is a dog person with a small, brown, happy, friendly dog named Max.
And Emily's a cat person.
With a black and white, quiet, sleepy cat named Luna. And with their hobbies, Paul loves vegetable pizza, the color blue, old rock music. Emily loves pasta, green, like nature and trees, and reading adventure stories.
See, the specificity is the magic ingredient there. Mentioning that your dad is a chef who cooks delicious meals at home, that isn't just a biographical footnote.
No, it paints a picture.
Right, it functions as an emotional entry point. The person listening naturally visualizes a warm kitchen and great food, and it practically forces a follow-up question.
Like, wow, what is his signature dish? Or did you learn how to cook from him?
Yes. By adding that one layer of detail, Emily transforms a static fact into an open door for conversation.
I think of these specific, highly textured details like conversational Velcro.
Conversational Velcro. Okay, explain that.
Well, if you are answering the tell me about yourself question and you offer these smooth, featureless statements like, I enjoy hanging out with my friends and listening to music.
There is no texture there.
Exactly. It's like throwing a smooth rubber ball at a smooth wall. It just bounces off. The conversation completely stalls.
Because there's nothing to grab onto.
Right. You need to throw out the scratchy side of the Velcro. A sleepy black and white cat named Luna. Old rock music. Paul specifically mentions loving vegetable pizza.
And those distinct textured details fly across the table.
And you are just hoping the other person has the matching fuzzy side of the Velcro to stick to it. Like, oh, you like old rock. Have you seen any good live shows recently?
That is such a great way to look at it.
That texture is what keeps the dialogue actually gripping.
And providing the friction required for a conversation to grip, that is a brilliant way to frame the mechanism. And you can see this dynamic playing out perfectly between Paul and Emily.
They constantly acknowledge when their Velcro matches or when it doesn't.
Yes. When Emily leans into being a cat person and Paul counters with his energetic dog, they don't gloss over the mismatch. They actually highlight it as a playful contrast.
Which is so much better than just pretending to agree.
Absolutely. Highlighting differences in these low-stakes areas actually strengthens the interaction because it proves both people are actively listening and engaging with the material being presented.
Rather than just, waiting for their turn to speak.
Exactly.
Now, finding common ground through shared passions, that is pretty standard networking advice. But this video takes a very surprising turn that I feel like most executive communication coaches completely miss.
This might be my favorite part of the whole framework.
Yeah. After laying out all the things they love, Paul and Emily actively explore what they do not like. They start deploying what we could call strategic dislikes.
It is one of the most masterful, yet totally underutilized psychological tools in communication. We are so conditioned to believe that introductions require flawless positivity.
Let's look at the actual dislikes they use because they are really specific. Paul says he hates olives because he doesn't like the taste, and he hates waiting in long lines because he finds it boring. She shares that she doesn't like very spicy or hot food, and she absolutely hates waking up early because she fiercely loves her sleep.
And the video literally frames this as a technique to show your personality.
It does. It gives the viewers a formula to use. Basically, I am a teacher, I like dogs and pizza, but I don't like olives.
And if you look at the underlying psychology of why that simple formula is so disarming, it's fascinating. In high-stakes introductory scenarios, like that job interview or a first date, people put up this impenetrable facade of constant agreeability.
Oh, the bobblehead effect. They nod, they smile, they pretend to love absolutely everything.
Yes, but endless agreeability is actually alienating to the human brain. It feels artificial, like a plastic plant. When someone agrees with everything you say and has no preferences of their own, you subconsciously start to distrust them.
It feels like you were being managed by a PR representative or like someone trying to sell you a timeshare. You're just waiting for the catch.
Exactly. But by sharing a minor harmless dislike, you instantly shatter that artificial facade.
Yeah.
You signal to the other person, hey, I have distinct boundaries, I have my own mind, and I am comfortable enough to show you a slight imperfection.
It makes you appear significantly more authentic and grounded.
Vulnerability, even on a microscopic scale like complaining about pizza toppings or your hatred of a 6:0 a.m. alarm, builds trust much faster than relentless cheerfulness.
But wait, if I go into a networking event and try to bond over negativity, I risk sounding like a miserable person.
There is a line, definitely.
That's right. Where's the line between a charming, relatable dislike, like Paul hating long lines or olives, and just being a toxic conversation killer?
Yeah.
If I sit down and immediately say, hi, I'm an accountant, I like jazz, and I absolutely despise my ex-wife and the current tax code.
Yeah, the other person is going to slowly back out of the room.
Exactly. So how do we find that balance?
The distinction lies entirely in the emotional weight and the universality of the topic you choose. A conversation killer usually involves a structural complaint, a deeply personal grievance, or an attack on a specific group or belief system.
Because that puts the listener on the spot.
Exactly. Those topics force the listener into an uncomfortable position where they either have to play therapist, debate you, or just awkwardly validate your anger.
But look at the genius of Paul and Emily's choices. Olives, waiting in line, spicy food, waking up early.
These are sensory experiences or minor situational inconveniences.
They're completely low stakes.
Extremely low stakes, yet universally understood. I mean, almost everyone has felt the mild annoyance of a slow-moving line or the dread of an early morning alarm.
So a strategic dislike should be a gentle grievance that the other person can laugh about or easily nod along with.
It invites camaraderie. You are showing that you have a personality and personal preferences without demonstrating that you have unresolved baggage. It creates a perfectly balanced three-dimensional snapshot.
You curate your grievances. Keep them light, keep them sensory, and keep them relatable. Hating traffic on your commute. Fantastic conversational Velcro. Hating your specific manager. Keep that entirely to yourself.
You want to deploy a dislike that invites a shared chuckle, not a heavy sigh.
Okay, so we have decoded this massive arsenal of tools from what is basically a 6-minute beginner's English video.
It's pretty incredible when you lay it all out.
We have the foundational facts to build our mental stage and lower cognitive load. We have our conversational Velcro, the textured details about family, pets, and hobbies that give people something to grab onto, and we have our secret weapon, the strategic low-stakes dislikes that break the fake facade and build trust.
But having all these tools creates a totally new problem.
Right. The danger now is unleashing all of this at once and completely overwhelming the poor person who innocently asked the question.
Which leads us to the final and perhaps most vital piece of advice in the video's instruction, and that's execution through contextualization. Well, you can have the best conversational Velcro in the world, but if you throw it all at someone simultaneously, they will just duck.
The video actually explicitly addresses this. The narrator comes in and advises, quote, "You don't need to say everything at one time."
Such good advice.
It teaches the viewer to tailor their introduction to the exact physical and social situation they are currently standing in. They provide two distinct examples. If you are sitting in a classroom, you state your name and a relevant fact, like why you were learning English.
But if you are at a party, the context shifts entirely.
Right. You state your name and a hobby. like Emily mentioning her painting. You keep it simple, you keep it friendly, and you allow space for the other person to ask, oh, what kind of things do you paint?
The emphasis on situational awareness is profound here, because the fatal flaw most adults make when they hear "tell me about yourself" is assuming the requester is asking for a comprehensive autobiography.
Yes. When the panic sets in, they attempt to compress 30 years of human existence, their entire resume, and their core values into this breathless 2-minute monologue.
But the psychological goal of that foreign is never to acquire an encyclopedic knowledge of your life.
So what is the goal then?
The goal is simply to find a mutually agreeable starting point that leads to a natural dialogue.
I think of our identities like a massive, sprawling, all-you-can-eat buffet.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Your life have the heavy roast beef of your career trajectory, the complex mashed potatoes of your childhood and family dynamics, and, the weird, brightly colored Jell-O salad of your eccentric weekend hobbies.
The Jell-O salad, right.
When someone asks about you, the impulse is to grab their head and force them to look at the entire buffet table at once, terrified they might miss a dish that proves your worth.
Which is incredibly overwhelming for the listener. I mean, they didn't ask for the entire catering spread, they just wanted a snack.
Exactly. You just want to hand them a single, carefully chosen appetizer that makes sense for the room you are in. If you're standing in a conference hall at a business event, hand them a professional appetizer. Maybe a quick note about your current project, garnished with a tiny toothpick of a personal hobby.
And if you were on a first date.
You hand them a passion-based appetizer with a side of a funny, harmless dislike. You give them one interesting bite, and then you just stop talking.
You let them chew on it.
Yes. If they find the texture interesting, if the Velcro catches, they will naturally ask for more.
And that ping-pong dynamic, that is the essence of actual communication. By limiting what you share to just a few tailored points, this menu approach, you are deliberately leaving oxygen in the room.
You aren't suffocating them with your resume.
Right. You are giving the other person the space and the material they need to participate. You are no longer talking at them in a blind panic. You are actively inviting them to talk with you.
And there's one final physical mechanic the video points out that we cannot ignore. Smiling. The narrator reminds the learners to smile while delivering their tailored appetizer. It sounds like the most cliché advice on the planet, but honestly, when you are caught in the headlights, your facial muscles literally freeze as part of the fight-or-flight response.
It is entirely neurological. When your brain perceives the question as a threat or a test, it restricts your physical expressions. But consciously choosing to smile intervenes in that process.
How does that work scientifically?
Well, from a behavioral standpoint, smiling engages mirror neurons in the listener's brain, which physically lowers their defenses, while simultaneously sending a signal to your own nervous system that you are safe.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it frames the entire exchange not as an interrogation, but as a mutual low-stakes exploration. It physically reinforces the reality that this is just a friendly interaction.
So when we pull all these threads together, we completely change our relationship to the most intimidating question in the English language.
We really do.
We started today with that awful feeling of dread, the flatlining brain and the sweaty palms when someone says, "Tell me about yourself." But this deceptively simple guide for language learners beautifully dismantles that anxiety.
It dismantles the anxiety by reframing the core nature of the moment. The prompt is not a pop quiz on your soul.
It's not a rigid test you have to pass with a perfectly optimized encyclopedic answer.
No. When someone asks you to tell them about yourself, they are simply extending an invitation. They are asking you to throw one piece of conversational Velcro into the space between you, just to see if they have the fuzzy side to match it.
You don't have to freeze up. You just step out of the glare, build a quick mental stage with a few facts, and offer them a slice of vegetable pizza.
Right, you tell them about your sleepy cat, or you bond over your shared hatred of 6:30 a.m. alarms.
You hand them an appetizer, and you smile.
You offer them a starting point, and you let the conversation build itself from there.
So as you head out into your week, we want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over. If an introduction is really just an invitation to connect, what is the one quirky, textured detail or harmless dislike that you usually hide because you want to seem perfectly smooth and professional, but might actually be your ultimate conversation starter if you finally dared to put it on your menu? Next time you find yourself caught in the headlights, try throwing out that specific piece of Velcro and just see who sticks.